Welcome to the Grandpa Channel, where stories don't fade, they get recorded. I'm Steve Harris. My grandkids call me Rivers. This podcast is where grandpas and grandchildren pull up a chair, turn on a mic, and let her rip. Grandpa stories are chock full of wisdom, life lessons, and frankly, funny as hell. Your stories are the magic elixir to help your grandkids navigate Mr. Toad's wild ride, aka life. Let's Grandpa. This episode of the Grandpa Channel is brought to you by Hires Big H, home out of wonderful hamburgers, French fries, onion rings, the magical and medicinal, so I say, root beer freeze. Head to Hires and treat yourself like the legend that you are. Now back to the channel, the brothers. And I'm paying him handsomely to come and talk about being a grandpa, his father. I could even turn into an all-out therapy session if many things go right. So we'll kind of start with a couple of questions. Is there a story from your childhood that your grandkids love to hear?
Some of them they love to hear. Some of them they roll their eyes.
But that's part of the joy.
That's part of the joy. That's right. It's like Lady and the Tramp.
Yeah.
I don't recollect whether I ever told you about old Reliable.
Yeah.
Yes, Grandpa. Oh, Grandpa. Anyway, I'm hoping that some of those stories. One of the stories that they like to hear about is a little dog we grew up with. My mother had bought a toy poodle that we called Toby. I don't understand why or how it got that name, but Toby was a pretty smart dog. The grandkids loved hearing about this. Toby had no fear. My mother remarried, and she brought a man into our lives whose name was Marshall, and he brought a dog with him. He was a great big German shepherd, and the dog was ferocious. I mean, he'd ripped holes in people that got into his enclosure. Toby had no fear, and Toby would just walk into his enclosure and grab him by the neck and just hang there, and the dog would kind of go back and forth, and Toby would sort of go back and forth underneath. But Toby would do nearly anything for cheese. We had a settlement pond on the 15 acres that we lived in Huntsville, and we would sometimes take cheese and we'd throw it, and the dog would run after it, find it, and he'd come back for more. One time my stepfather, who was not a kind man, he started throwing cheese into the little lake that we had back there, the settlement pond, where the dishwater would go in and settle out before we pump it out. And the dog would run off the dock and just jump into the water. And he did this over and over again. And the dog would just keep going until one time the dog just didn't have any more energy. He ran off and he just sank. And to his credit, Marshall dove in after him. He realized, I have probably killed my wife's dog, throwing cheese out into the water. And he managed to get it to shore and dry him out. Toby was a good dog. He was fearless. Fearless dog. And grandkids like hearing stories about
They like that.
the fearless dog.
Yeah.
Even in the
It
face,
teaches them to be fearless, right?
even in the face of great danger. That's right. They walk in.
Yeah.
They also recognize that there may be wisdom in being smarter than Toby when it comes to cheese.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's one story. Other stories, I frequently tell them stories about, well, after we left Huntsville, after my mother was divorced from Marshall, and he was well worth divorcing, she ended up getting a cat. And the cat, there was something wrong with the cat. I think that she called it Sylvie or Softy or something like that, just some dumb name. Well, the cat would just be sitting there and bolt up and then run into the walls. So I started calling the cat BD. Or why do you call him BD? Well, it stands for brain damage. I clearly have brain damage. And one of my first ventures I did with a friend, we named the account that we started
The trust.
Brain Damage Trust.
Yeah. Apparently, Household Pets fared really well this year.
Well, we had a number of them
Yeah.
through the years. I'll tell them stories about my mother and World War II and growing up in Holland and the German occupation of Holland and her father. I don't know if you want me to tell those stories.
Go ahead. You tell some.
She was born in 1934, and Hitler was rising to power during the 30s. He had spent some time in jail in the 20s and written Mein Kampf. And I have always been interested in following those things to understand what it was that my mother came from. But she tells stories about how one time she was with her aunt and they were walking, and there are many places in Holland and Germany. There are pedestrian bridges that go over the train canals. Oh, train tracks as well as canals. And they were coming over one of those pedestrian walkways. And from it, you could see quite a ways. And she saw a group of Jews that were moving toward the train station. There was they had their crams with the babies in it. The they had their valises, their satchels, the long coats, like they were going somewhere and they knew this was everything that they could take with them. And they stopped and watched. They called these things racias. So they would literally pull the people out of their homes and take them to wherever they were going, whether it was Auschwitz, Dachau, or any of the other concentration camps. Many of them did not know where they were going. Some of them trusted that they were families with children. There was very little opportunity to fight back. Some of them had hidden, but this was relatively early in the war. And as she tells the story, she says her aunt became very agitated as she watched this. And she said, "Stay here, don't move." My mother may have been 6, 7 years old. "Don't leave." And she ran down the gangway, the pedestrian walking bridge that they were on, and she ran around to where these German soldiers, and some of them were female, some of them were male, and she had gotten there just as they'd loaded all of the men onto the cattle cars. And then they began separating the women from their babies. So the prams were left standing on the train platform, and they were being loaded into a separate cattle car with their children that could walk and were separate, but the babies were left in there and they were crying, "My baby, my baby." And the babies were crying. They pick up the agitation of their mothers. And the men could do nothing. They were locked down already. My aunt ran into this group of women, SS, who were probably Dutch, but they were working with the Germans. And she said, "Please, please." "I can't have children. Please, just give me one. Just one." They said, "If you don't get out of here, you'll be loaded onto this transport. You leave now or you're on this transport with them." And she walked away crying. And my mother said that as she watched, these women got out of silver in a little silver boxes. They opened them and appeared to be syringes. And they plunged the syringes into the babies. And one by one, the platform went quiet. And then they just threw the prams into a waiting dump truck with the babies. Wow. World War II. Yeah. Yeah. My grandfather was born in 1897. So as the war broke out, he was in his 30s, approaching his 40s. And he was a mailman. He delivered mail for the Dutch post. As a result, he wore a uniform, and the soldiers mostly left him alone. And there was a certain respect for somebody in some type of a uniform. So he would take things from his neighbors. They were starving, and he would take some of the precious things that they had, and he would tuck them into the bottom of his mail bags. And as he went out into the country, he would trade them. Maybe it was some silver, maybe it was a painting. I have one of those paintings. But he would trade them for butter, maybe for a rabbit, maybe just for something they could eat, the farmers had. And he'd bring them back, and of course he would receive something for having done that. So he kept his family fed through making that happen, but also made it possible for his neighbors to eat by working on what was essentially the black market. And it was dangerous because if the Germans caught you in a black market, they could shoot you on the spot. But he always loved working a deal and trying to make things happen. And he needed the food, so he kept doing it through the war. In the last years of the war, there was a push where the Allies moved through Holland and pretty much forced the Germans out, but they went a bridge too far. There was a movie of the same name. And the Germans were able to push back in. They broke the lines, pushed back in. But many of the Dutch thought, oh, the war's over, we're liberated. Then, the Amis, the Americans had come through, and they came back in. And during that time, they just stripped the land of everything. Germany wasn't doing well, and so they needed everything. So, I mean, it was people were riding around. It was just bikes on rims that they were doing with. And during this time period, he at one time went to the dead letter office and picked up a bunch of mail with the idea that he'd go out and find food. And he put a few things underneath, and he'd been successful, found a few things to eat. And on the way back, two German soldiers who were also starving in the winter of 44, it was called the Hunger Winter. There were people literally who were in Amsterdam just dying as they walked along the street. It was everybody was starving to death. They were eating rats. It was a terrible time. And during that time period, the Red Cross had come up with an idea where they would take the children who were under 10 years old and they would take them to little fishing villages right on the edges of Holland and place them with fishermen's families so that Germans couldn't strip the fish as fast as they could bring them in. So there was always something to eat. And these children were dying, malnutrition. So one night it was very quiet. The children were told nothing. My mother was 10 years old, or right about 10 years old, right on the cusp of not being able to go. And they woke her up at midnight. It's after the curfew. And without telling her anything, they just be very quiet, and lights out. They made their way to the hub where all the garbage trucks were. And they had cleaned out the garbage trucks and put benches in the back of the garbage truck. And in those garbage trucks, parents just set their children on those benches and hoped that they would see them again. And they left. She told a story about one little girl, just 4 years old, who died in that garbage truck before they got to the first stop. She was so malnourished. And she ended up in a little town called Machem in North Holland on the coast. And there she stayed with a family that had a daughter about the same age, and they hoped that maybe she has some clothes they could share. They slept in the same bed, fed her, and she managed to make it through that last year. After the war was over, there was hand-to-hand fighting as the Germans were driven out for the last time. And the Germans would routinely, as she tells it, just throw a grenade into a house. And if people were not in the basement, or if they didn't have a cellar, they would die. And word got back that one little girl from Hilversum, where she was born, had been killed in one of these attacks, and they didn't know who it was, which one it was. So my grandparents were not sure that their youngest, a baby daughter, had survived or not. The war ended, the country's torn up, the roads are a mess. You can't really get anywhere. Everybody's just struggling to find the food that they need and to get by. And she remembers the church coming in and saying, we need to share with the Germans. What? Sometime in that same time period, I mean, they did do it. Sometime in that same time period, a message came back from this little fishing family who said, if you meet me in Rotterdam, I'll take the boat around. Your daughter's with me. So my grandfather rode his bicycle
with no rubber.
Yeah, by then there may have been some tires, but he rode his bicycle to the port and waited for this little fishing vessel to come in, and they wrapped their arms around each other. We're reunited.
Wow. When you tell these stories, what's the reaction of your kids and your grandkids?
Well, the older ones, they listen with greater interest when they understand where things are. And we talk a little bit about the rise of fascism and how these things happen and how it occurred, the larger history around it, and try to help them understand the benefits that we have as Americans. I mean, my mother, to this day, when she sees a big American flag in the breeze, she sometimes gets a little teary. She's 92 this year. They loved the Americans. They loved the freedom that they brought. They loved what they stood for. During this time period where she was in Machem, he'd taken dead letters out and had on his way back home with some two things in the bottom of his bag, two German soldiers that had stopped it. Mm-hmm. And said, what do you have in the bag? It's just letters, brief letters. And they said, no, what do you got in the box? It's just letters. We said, empty it. And of course, out rolls a couple of cans of food and a little bit of meat. And these two German soldiers just start fighting like dogs for this, because they're starting too. I don't have much. And he just took his bike and began backing away. as fast as he could, kind of zigzagging because he knew he could be shot. And he got home and, told his wife. She says, "Oh, Lau," his name was Lawrence. "Lau, what would I have done if you'd have been killed? What would happen to us, our children, you can't do this anymore." And he loved her. He would do anything for her. He really was meant to be a shopkeeper. He loved doing things, making deals, trading things. But she said, "No, I want to marry a man who doesn't have just a regular job," because she'd seen tough things in her own life. About 2 years after the war was over, a couple from Ogden knocked on her door and said, "We have a message, Jesus Christ, and a restoration of the gospel." And she was always a spiritual woman, but she wasn't a churchgoer. She'd stopped going to church when a friend of hers had had a child, and they often had their children at home. When their child died shortly after birth or was stillborn, one way or another, the baby had died. And she had seen her going to the church to talk to the pastor, the local Dutch Reformed priest. And on the way back, she was red-eyed and crying and holding this little bundle that she had in her arms. She says, what happened? What happened? He says, "I went there for help to bury the baby, to find a place to put my little one." And he said, "I'm sorry. I wish I could help, but your baby wasn't baptized. And as a result, it's unholy. It can't be buried on church ground." And the thought of this little baby having been condemned, having done nothing, just so angered her that she said, "If that's the case, none of my remaining children, if I have more, will be baptized. I will not. I would rather be in hell with you and your baby than in heaven with those people." And she was adamant about it. It made her sick. So the first question she asked these missionaries, the Montfrance, sister Montfrance family, she asked, "Tell me before you come in, what do you believe about babies and baptism?" They said, "Oh, we don't believe that babies should be baptized." And they opened to Moroni chapter 8, and they worked through that scripture about how they're pure. They can't make that decision. They don't have the capacity. And she was entranced by that. She thought that, "Come in, let's talk." They had a 6-hour discussion. They went through the plan of salvation, and she was just, this makes sense. This makes sense about how God loves us, his son, the restoration, the prophet Joseph, all of these things were gone through. And that night, she told her husband when he came in, "I think I found something that really makes sense." I said, "Could we just eat?" She always had his food ready. But she wouldn't stop. He knew what she wants is going to happen. And he said, "It's all right. If you want to go this way, fine. I'm happy with her.
I'm okay.
I don't think if you want to join the American church, would do that." So, my grandmother ended up joining. She had 6 children. Now, my grandfather followed along after that. It was something she felt that was right. And did you know your grandpa then? I did. Well, I didn't know it then.
Right, but it was
a little before he was born.
maybe it did.
Yeah,
Looking down.
But he literally would do anything for her. She wore the pants in the family in many respects, but she loved him and he loved her. And it was very clear. Their relationship was always a really good relationship. And my memories of him are when he was in his mid-60s, at least, approaching 70. And he had come to America. Imagine coming to America in your 50s, you don't speak English. Why do you want to come? Well, my wife wants to get to see us. Well, this is before they made many sacrifices to get there. Anyway, there were stalwarts in the church in Hilversum, and Little Branch in Hilversum. And she would constantly say, we need to go to America. Told us to gather design. We should go there. This is where the temple is. We need to go. He says, "How are we ever going to make it? How is that going to happen?" He says, "The Lord will provide a way. He will make something happen." He said, "Well, okay. If the Lord provides a way, we'll go." I said, "Well, all right. Then we need to get ready. You need to go down and apply for a visa." What was I thinking? He was happy to come home, smoke his cigar. He'd given that up. He was happy to have some tea. He was now doing Coastum. He was happy being a Dutchman. He loved Holland. He loved being there. And he said, oh, man, okay. So he went down, he applied for the visa. And every once in a while, he would come home and say, Val, do they have the money? And she would go, no, not yet. But it's coming. Something will happen. One day he came home and said, honey, this will never happen unless somebody gives us the money. Who is going to do that? And she said, that's it. That's it. That is what's going to happen. That is what's going to happen. He said, okay, tell me when it happens. It's a Fiddler on the Roof moment, a little bit like that. And one day she receives a letter. Her brother left Holland before the war, gone to America. And it made it aware of some of the people in Salt Lake that she was trying to get there. And the Dutch banks had a rule that you could not withdraw your money that you had in Holland. You couldn't take your pension unless you lived in Holland. Capital flight was a real problem, and they just needed that money there. And so they sent a letter to her and said, we understand you need money to come to America. We have 6,000 guilders or more in the bank, which was a small fortune. Withdraw it all, use what you need. Give us the balance when you get here. You can pay us back as you're able. And she couldn't believe this. He came home and said, Val, do we have the money? And she said, yeah, he has the money. 2 weeks later, they were on a freighter, booking passage. All of the passenger flights were booked. Mm-hmm. Their visa was 2 weeks from expiring.
Oh, boy. Wow.
And she had come around. She had said, Lord, I want to go. It's a righteous desire. I want to do this. But if you'd rather that I stayed here, that we stayed here, that we don't go, we'll stay here. We'll build Zion here.
Do you think it was that last kind of capitulation of will that pushed it over the edge?
And the Lord frequently.
Yeah.
Are you willing?
Mm-hmm.
Really willing?
Mm-hmm.
Is this you or me?
Show me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not so much to show me, but show yourself.
Yeah, that's true.
Her heart was right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, they sold their possessions. Their house was gone. They were renting. All these things made ready. 2 weeks before they were on the boat and they're heading to America. The captain of the ship asked her, he said, are you folks members of that Mormon church? Mm-hmm. I said, and he says, I'm glad you're on board. And she said, why? I said, well, it seems to me that when we have your people on board, crossings go better for some reason. Mm-hmm. And she was glad to hear that. It wasn't a big ship. It was a freighter, not large. Midway across the Atlantic, a big storm blew up, and the captain came in and said, we probably won't be able to feed you dinner tonight. We're anticipating really rough weather. And we need you to go back to your rooms, and we need you to secure all your luggage. There's a good chance that if you don't, it will not, and it'll be all over the place. So you need to secure everything, put it away, make sure, and it probably will be too rough to feed you. She spread the word to everybody, and she said, we'll be fine. The Lord would not have brought us this far to die in a watery grave. We will be okay. Well, later that night, she began dressing for dinner, changing into something. Back then, it was a little more formal. So she dressed, and they said, what are you doing? And they said they went out to dinner. So, well, feel the bum. It's not rocking. Let's go eat. Let's go have dinner. And so they all changed. They went out. The wind was howling, and the waves, mountains, but the boat was just straight as an arrow. The waves would drop as it hit the boat and then pick up on the other side. And they didn't have the technology that we have today that compensates for wave action. I mean, the boat would have been all over the waves, just
But down there it was.
Yeah, but it was smooth. And they went in, they thought, well, okay, it's not as bad as the captain thought. Mm-hmm. And they ate, and they came back to their cabins. And the next day, the captain came to her and said, I've never seen anything like this. Never seen anything. Those waves should have had us moving around like you shouldn't have been able to stand on the deck. But the waves just vanished and then continued on the other side. We had this pool of calm through that entire storm. I don't know how it happened. I got another sin. The Lord blessed us.
Wow.
When he got to America, my mother was the only one who could speak any English. They spoke a little bit, very, very little. And so her father had sent her out to find some food, and they come through Ellis Island. I mean, it's a big change coming into New York. And they found a little kiosk, a little place that sold food. And I said, well, what do you want? He says, oh, see if you can get some wurst. So she asked for wurst. Do you have the long with it? And trying to explain what it was. He says, oh, we got hot dogs. And he said, what is hot dogs? Dogs, it's like those tubes of meat. And she went back to her dad and said, I don't know that we want these because I think it's dog. He said, where have we come? They eat their dogs here? Anyway, the process of learning.
One thing that strikes me is that if you weren't telling these stories, who would be telling these stories?
Yeah.
And I think one of the highest callings of a grandpa is to pass down information about your mom and her parents. And I don't know if it's necessarily received with great joy and anticipation by grandkids or kids. But to me, these stories just give me, it's kind of like I can do hard things because my grandparents did hard things.
Well, in faith.
Yeah.
She had the faith to believe these things will come to pass. These are righteous desires, and we're going to do them. And she worked toward them. Mm-hmm. And her family, it only takes one, but she had this magnetic capacity to bring everybody. Her family was not happy that they were leaving. The extended family. I mean, they might never see them again. Her brother had gone, never been back to home. And it's like they'll vanish. We'll never see them. In fact, they didn't go back until many, many, many years later. Many of those people were gone who had said goodbye to them on the docks.
Do you make a conscious decision to tell these stories? I guess that brings up the larger question of how do you share your faith with your kids, but more importantly with your grandkids. And how old is your oldest grandchild?
She's 13.
Yeah. We have a 14-year-old.
It's still young. And I look for opportunities and I try to find a place where they're willing to listen to the story. These are relatively complex and moving stories, but kids are kids and they're sometimes not ready to hear things.
Your story about your great aunt, suppose, that's a stunner. That's just, I can't get that one out of my mind's eye. My gosh, yeah.
Yeah, they were. She tells stories about how when the Germans would march by, my grandmother would always spit on the ground. And she said, I'd try to spit my mouth. My mouth was always really dry.
Probably.
She was scared.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? Justifiably so.
Yeah. So you look for opportunities. Sometimes they don't readily present themselves. That's been my experience. I wish that everybody, that my kids and grandkids would just sit upright with, tell me more. Yeah, it's story time. So I guess you have to kind of do it when you can.
You do, and you mix it in with other things. The main thing, I think, is to try and let them know that they are important to you, that you love them, and that you think that these things will be beneficial to them. And we make it clear that you're not telling it just to tell a story, but because there's something here that you can take with you. This is part of you. You have some of that genetic material working within you. Some of it can be a warning. Some of it can be an invitation to do more for it.
I happen to know a fair amount about art because we talk about these things. We talk about serious things. We laugh too, but I know a little bit about your dad, and I want to be charitable.
We should be charitable.
We should be charitable. You probably learned lessons from your father, but more of the things that you don't.
Right.
What lessons, or how do you feel like you were different than your dad with your kids and with? I wouldn't imagine he had much of a relationship with your kids.
He did not.
Yeah.
In fact, he didn't know their names. Oh boy, he didn't know their names.
Tell us a little bit about your dad.
Well, my father comes from a rough background, and I think that it's fair to give people a little more space because of the difficulties that he went through. He was born Arthur Wellington Weart. Weart was his last name, Weart, and that's my middle name. So my father was born in 1930, beginning of the Depression. His mother was a little older. His father was a guy who'd been through a bunch of relationships, and they had fun together for a while, and then she got pregnant, and he was gone. He kind of disappeared from her life. Didn't really get a divorce, but she knew the brothers' family. Harrison and Dorothy brothers were a relatively prominent family, and he came from the Savage stock, who, the Savage family is kind of the photographer. Yeah, exactly. Photographer. And he had worked for many years for the Hobel family as a financier, Hobel Zoo, and had eventually branched off and started what became Valley Bank and then Bank One. Anyway, he was LDS, but his temple was the Masonic temple, and his meeting house was the Alta Club. He didn't really clan with the structure of the hierarchy,
The prevailing structure.
no, it wasn't. He wasn't excited about that. Dorothy was a Merrill. She Merrill's another one, that big name. She smoked like a chimney. Both of them highly intelligent. She was one of the first female graduates of Stanford Law School. He had graduated law school at the University of Utah. Together, they were a somewhat formidable couple. Into their life comes my maternal grandmother, and she can't really take care of this child. And she makes a deal when he's just a year or two old and says, can you take care of him while I try and create a place? And they said, we'll do this if you let us adopt the baby. And she said, okay. But she had no intention of following through. But they couldn't have children. And they took the baby because they just wanted to have a child. And as it often happens, once the woman relaxes, they've been a child, and she ended up getting pregnant. Mm-hmm. So a few years later, the biological child, his name is Bonnie. And my father was part of that household and knew Dorothy as his mother. It's who he called Mommy. And his real mother, his biological mother, he knew as Aunt Hilda. So one day when he was about 5 years old, Aunt Hilda came and said, hey, can I take little Art to a movie? He was all for that. Big excitement. So he went with her, but on the way, she told him, we're going to California, and you're going to be with me now, and you're not going to go back. The wheels started turning, and he was bright, and he came upon a plan where, he saw a fire truck and very excited about it, and he just wanted to tell Mommy about his fire truck, and he wouldn't let up. So finally she put a nickel in the slot. She dialed him up and got Dorothy on the phone. She handed the phone to me and said, Mommy, Aunt Hilda's taking me to California. I don't want to. And that's the phone click. It's the last she heard them for 4 years.
And that they didn't know about that, did they?
No, they had no idea. Well, to my knowledge.
Yeah.
And it was a
Kidnapping.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
And so he ended up in San Francisco and remembered his mother selling flowers on the street corner through the final parts of the Depression, living in utter poverty with her mother. And then her mother, he didn't know it then, but his father had passed away in 1935 of tuberculosis in Des Moines, Iowa. She had always told the brothers, he won't give me permission, he won't divorce me, he won't let, that was her excuse. But once he died, she had no more excuse. So she either take the baby or cave in, adopt. So she took him instead. And she died in 1939, and his grandmother didn't feel she could take care of a 10-year-old. Mm-hmm. I think she was born in 1865, just as the Civil War was ending. Oh. Yeah, fast how this goes, right?
Yeah.
And she didn't feel like she could do that. I did a little research and found out that this grandmother lived until 1963, and he had no contact with her. She pinned a note to his lapel, packed his bag, put him on a train, and it said, delivered to those brothers' family, and they wouldn't take him. They said he ended up in the care of the Children's Safety Society, as they called it back then, and he rotated through a number of different foster homes, and in the process was in and out of the brother's house a little bit. It was just, who knows, it was a mess. And finally, Harrison Brothers was also he was commander in the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. The CCC that built a lot of the national parks, the steps in the stone, and they built Ogden High School. They did a lot of make work projects, and he was a commander who was in the Guard. One of the things he did in doing what he did. And when my father was about 16, he came up with the idea that, he'd like to join the service. And Harrison thought, well, that could work. And so he sponsored him into it, and kind of was a makeup period. They kind of came on it. So at 17 or so, 16, 17, he was in the Air Force. Stories of racing around and, going from one place to another, learning radio. And the Korean conflict started, and he ended up going to Korea and deciding that that was not where he wanted to be. I think probably the real beginnings of his problems of womanizing began when he went to Japan and came to understand what geishas were and how they worked. I think my father could have been a good father if he would have not had that happen in his life. He ended up coming home, was repairing televisions, and he'd been sent out on a job to repair the TV at my grandfather's house. He'd fixed that, and Grandpa jokingly said, "So, instead of money, you want to just take her?" Let me think about this. Anyway, they ended up beginning to. She was waiting for a missionary, and she wishes that she had waited. Yeah. But as things moved forward, they ended up getting married. She didn't have a lot of confidence in herself. She felt like she wasn't worth much, and there have been a lot of reasons for that.
How did you become who you were in spite of?
Yeah,
I mean, that's a harsh way of saying it, but in spite of your dad.
We come from a line of strong-willed women, and I appreciate that. And I tell my daughters, I said, you come from strong women. You can be strong. You can be bright. You can be capable. And my mother was always the one that did well in school. She studied hard. She had an older sister who was the beauty queen. She was not a student. And my mother just always worked through things. My grandfather, when he picked her up and, at the Rotterdam Harbor, and there was, her desire was to move on to the gymnasium, to the Hochschule, the Oberschule, the Oberschool. And my grandmother said, what is the point? Mm-hmm. She's just going to be pregnant, married, end of story. And he said, no, she's this we were going to do. Mm-hmm. And he followed through. He helped her to get what she could as far as schooling goes. Mm-hmm. She always appreciated that. She was the only one in the family that graduated from college and went on for a master's. I mean, she became a teacher, and she pushed her way through, and education helped her, saved her, made it possible for her to do what she did. So we value education and try to teach that.
That's gone forward in your family, and it will with your grandkids.
Clearly, without a doubt.
If your grandkids could only remember one thing you ever said, what would you want that to be?
That I would want them to know that they are loved for who they are. Not for who I think they should be or what they think they should be, but they're loved for who they are right now in the moment. That I also love their potential and that they can do hard things. We can do hard things. Just because it's hard doesn't mean it's bad. We can do this. We can take the next step.
See, the thing with you, and I think with most grandpas, is that we have street cred about hard things from our lives that maybe our kids don't know what those hard things are.
They suffer through their own type of hardship. And that hardship may be more difficult than the ones we went through. It
might be different.
Yes, it's definitely different. But the point is that either way, it's hard. And we can help them believe that there is a way through it. And they don't have to fold. They don't have to follow the world's ways. There is a plan and pattern that will lead to greater success. Believe in that. Work toward it. Listen to the Spirit. So I would hope they would remember that.
Do you think that you learned specific lessons of what not to do or to do from your dad?
Absolutely. Yeah.
What would you
Yeah.
think that some of those lessons are?
Well, my brother and I would frequently say when we were running into some challenge in our family, what would our father do? And then we do the opposite. We usually work out fairly well. It was,
What do you think he would say to you on the other side of the veil? The reason why I ask that is my dad, with his father being an alcoholic, he was a kind of an absentee, sad, but my dad just said, I don't know. What is my dad what am I going to say to my dad, or what is my dad going to say to me? What do you think your dad would say to you, with being on the other side of the veil?
yeah, I don't know what he would say, but what I can say,
What would you say to him?
tell me what you're thinking. I would try to understand where he is, what he sees, what he observes, and hopefully find a middle ground, hopefully be able to bring him to a better place. It was always my hope. I was not successful.
Well,
There are still times,
yeah.
though he's been dead for quite a few years, there are still times that I feel moved to pray for him, though he's not in this life.
Mhm.
And I hope for some mercy. I hope it for myself.
The level of mercy that you would mete out to him, is it higher now than it was back 20 years ago?
Of course, it's a growing thing. I think there is at least for me, as I've grown older and I see the things in the world, I go, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
But I also recognize that there comes a place where you have to choose. There comes a time when, regardless of the difficulties that you had in the past, you have to choose to not perpetuate what you've been through.
Mm-hmm.
As I talk to my children, and as I've explained those things, I've said my objective and my hope is that I can help break those chains. But I want to start a new one that binds us together, because the way that he lived didn't bind us.
Mm-hmm.
There was so much lost. There were so many opportunities that could have been, and I regret what could have been that wasn't, because of the choices. Sometimes the choices I made, as though I would try to bring him in. There were times when I would cave in and act his way, and that wasn't right or good, but
it's understandable.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to have another episode with my friend Art coming back telling more stories. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you enjoy the Grandpa Channel.
Thanks.
That's it for today's episode of the Grandpa Channel. Leave a review, share it with a friend, or better yet, tell your favorite grandpa. We're on a mission to gather 1 million grandpas, storytellers, wisdom keepers, and lovable wild cards. Until next time, keep the mic hot, the memories fresh, and the jokes just slightly inappropriate. I'm out of here.